liberty, and justice for all.
All right, thank you. And now I think looking for a motion for approval of the agenda for tonight's meeting.
So move.
Erickson, is there a second?
Second.
All right,
Woodward wins.
Woodward, second. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. All right, we're moving on. Number 5, we're at the warming shelter ordinance language discussion. And if we could throw that up on the screen here. And David, if you could introduce this for us, please.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. So last Wednesday, the Planning Commission voted unanimously to pursue amending the current zoning code to allow for warming shelters as an interim use, and they directed staff to take an expedited approach to this amendment process, and that's why we're holding this special meeting tonight. In the packet is the draft language that will be proposed ordinance number 1521 that'll be going before the city council. This draft ordinance amends section 515-63, which is the B4 section of the ordinance. The reason we're doing this, the B4, is because that is the location that that Bridges of Hope is looking to open their warming shelter at 1919 South 6th Street, and it's in a B4. And because we're kind of taking an expedited route, it's easier just to amend the section of ordinance that needs to be amended, not amending the whole code. And then per the discussion last Wednesday, then we'll be looking at it much broader in the new code of all the different zones that we may consider allowing a warming shelter. But then to expedite this, we also want it's easiest to focus on just one section of code. Let's see. So what we're looking at tonight, before I walk you through, just to let you know what we're looking for, is just an affirmative motion to send the proposed language with any amendments, additions that you might propose to the city council for consideration and adoption. And again, kind of an idea of what the timeline is going to be looking like. Obviously tonight, looking for the commission to approve language. On November 1st, that's next Monday, it'll go before proposed ordinance number 1521 will go before the city council to conduct the first reading of the ordinance per city charter. On November 15th, the council will conduct the second reading of the ordinance per city charter and hold the public hearing for the proposed ordinance, and then we'll vote for adopted said ordinance. Last week, we talked about potentially the city council holding the public hearing on November 1st. We had a snag of getting the legal notice for that published, so it couldn't be held on November 1st, so that's why we're holding it on November 15th. This ends up actually just taking the same form that general ordinance amendments take, excluding the zoning code, just general ordinance amendments take, where they go to hold the first reading, hold the second reading, then the public hearing happens, and then council votes. So that'll be on November 15th. Then on November 17th, which is your regular meeting for the month, the Planning Commission will consider the warming shelter interim use permit application for 1919 South 6th Street. That application has been sent to Bridges of Hope for them to start filling out, so then we can get it and get that notified, the public hearing and such, for November 17th. One little thing to note, technically ordinances do not go into effect until a week after they are approved, but we'll still have the interim use permit come before the council, the Planning Commission. Obviously, once the council approves it, it goes into effect a week later. Your recommendation wouldn't go to council until December 6th anyway. So it's not a big deal. And then December 6th is the council would consider the recommendation from the Planning Commission and hopefully approve the interim use permit for the warming shelter, and then they can hit the ground running. So that's what our pretty much most expedited timeline looks like. So any questions on that first before we dive into the proposed ordinance language?
Question for staff. Carry on, Mr.
Okay, James, you want to scroll down to the next page, please? So the ordinance amendment is pretty simple. What we're doing, amending section 515-63-5. 5 is the interim use section of the ordinance. Right now, there are no interim uses listed in section 5, so the amendment strikes A that says none and creates a new A that says warming shelters for the purpose of temporarily sheltering homeless persons. And there are 6 ordinance conditions. So again, these are the core ordinances that we're just going to put conditions to put straight in the ordinance in there that I have drafted and proposing. And again, I pulled some of these from other ordinances such as the one in Bemidji, Minneapolis, and the proposed language that St. Paul is considering right now as well. The first is operation shall not exceed 16 continuous hours. So again, that gets at this is supposed to be an evening thing, not a 24-hour thing. Facility occupancy shall not exceed 30 beds or a total occupancy of facility as set by the fire marshal, whichever is less. Bridges of Hope is proposing a 20-bed facility. 30, I just felt like it gives a little wiggle room. Plus, I think the benefit of reducing it to of keeping a specific amount of beds is you do a couple things. Is the main thing is you don't end up with potentially a facility that's housing, potentially 100 people or something in a night. It kind of keeps them small. Then they have less of an impact on the neighborhoods and where they're at. And maybe if you were to need furthermore in the future, you would kind of naturally have to spread them out a little bit. Also, by keeping them small, there's less possibility of issues arising with those using the facility. Number 3, the facility shall be staffed during all hours of operation. I know that is something that Bridges of Hope is intending to do with their shelter, and I think that's also a wise thing. Again, if we're going to be housing people, there should be a staff member there at all times managing the facility. Number 4 is 24-hour contact information shall be provided to the City of Brainerd Police Department and Crow Wing County Community Services Department. Again, this is just make sure we have contact at all times should any issues arise. Number 5, outdoor storage of equipment, furniture, personal items, or other such possessions of those using the facility shall not be permitted. Again, we're trying to make sure that even with the shelter being there, it's not a big impact to the surrounding area. And then the last is the facility shall meet all applicable building safety, fire, and health code requirements. This one's kind of a given, but it's always good just to call it out. It needs to meet all code. They can't just have an open room and throw some cots in there. If it has to be sprinkled, it has to be sprinkled. If it needs fire, if it needs extra egress, it needs extra egress. They have to meet those requirements. We're just, again, calling that out. Again, the purpose of having these conditions in here instead of just putting them on the Planning Commission, just putting them on every application is, one, it's some standards that every warming shelter we know is going to have to meet. And then if a warming shelter application doesn't meet one of these 6, the Planning Commission or the City Council has the right to just straight up deny that application because they don't meet the basic requirements as set forth in the code. Now, again, with each permit that would come before the Planning Commission, you could also add situation-based, reasonable conditions on top of these 6 as well. Again, based off of the location or the setting, you could add additional conditions on top of these 6 as well. So that is essentially the ordinance amendment. And so I guess now, Mr. Chair, let's take any comments, questions, concerns that the commission has regarding this proposed ordinance amendment.
Thank you, David. And just to be clear, Section 2 and Section 3 here, this is going to basically take full force 1 week after its publication. So
Correct.
After City Council would take a favorable action, assuming it taken favorable action after that second reading and such, then a week later this is...
Incorrect. And to the timeline that we're proposing, the Planning Commission would be considering the interim use permit prior to that 1 week date, but the understanding is the council makes the ultimate authority decision, and it would go to them after the applicable date. So you're considering this before it's officially gone into effect, but the council has already approved it, and by the time it gets to council, it will be in full effect.
Thank you. Questions for staff? Mr. Erickson.
I got one question, just something I was thinking about as I was reading through this, parking. I know we're talking about sheltering homeless, but that certainly could be adding potentially up to 30 spots. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? I know there's a sizable parking lot there, so probably has the capacity, or
Yep, so right now, and let me try
I
to
didn't
pull up.
count stalls or anything.
I have not
kinda
counted stalls. I can pull up
eyeballing
the GIS of that site right now. Oh, you got it up, James? Can you zoom in a little bit more? Or is that as zoom in as you can close you can get?
I'm just trying to think critically of, things
Yeah.
that we might.
So
be missing.
so obviously there's a pretty sizable parking lot there. Again, this is gonna be after, what they're gonna be recommending is 8 p.m. to roughly 8 a.m. So I think before any of the other businesses in that facility, open, and it'll be after they close, before they open. So I don't think we have to worry about parking issues. I think staffing wise, they're only planning on, I think maybe 1 or 2 staff members during open hours, operating hours. So I don't think it's too much of an issue in this location. Whether or not you want to call it out in the code, you could. Currently, in the current ordinance, B4 is exempt from any parking requirements. So in theory, could another warming shelter in a B4 want to open up and not have as much parking? Yes. But that maybe would be something that the planning commission can then add as a reasonable condition to that application as well. This site doesn't, unlike the previous site, this site has like no parking, and we need you to address the parking issues. So,
Thank you. Yeah, if it's, if it's not in B4, then it's really a non-issue. And actually, just seeing this too, there's more there than I even thought there was.
Thank you. Other questions for staff? Ms. Woodward?
What's the current ordinance for how long a vehicle is allowed to remain parked? Like, do we have something where vehicles are ticketed after like
This
7
is
days
private
or 14
properties.
days?
this is private property,
Private
so it can
property.
sit on there as long as the public,
Okay.
as long as it's licensed and operable, it can sit there for as long as the property owner allows it to sit there.
Okay.
Other questions for staff?
Quick question.
Mr. Gordon.
Mr. Chair, what other businesses or agencies are in that building? Is there, just out of curiosity?
I'm actually not sure. James, do you recall when you went and paid a visit? Let me see if I can. Otherwise, I am not.
I know it was the old state unemployment office, Minnesota office. Way back.
The room that they're looking to occupy was formerly a Head Start.
Oh, okay.
They're no longer in that spot.
I should know that. I drive by that every day.
I know. Used to have dental and orthodontics there. I don't know if it still has those features there or not.
I think that's a building down.
It is, well, it may have been that too, but the next building still has that, so that might be.
Mr. Chansky, the outdoor storage of equipment, would that include bicycles, like putting a bike rack out there or something? Does that fall into that category for individuals that may not have vehicles or not be on foot, but may be using bicycles to get around?
That's a good point, Mr. Chair. I honestly didn't think about that. And an argument could be made that could be included in this line, so we could amend this line to say excluding bicycles. I think one of the things we want, in my mind, I will say, it wasn't necessarily the bicycle that I had in mind here. I think what I had more in mind is what we don't want is, the collection of shopping carts or something sitting out front overnight. And that's in my mind was more of what I was trying to get at with the outdoor storage of, we don't want a bunch of shopping carts or bags or things sitting out front overnight. If they want to put a bike rack there for just standalone bikes, I don't think that would be a problem.
I think you'll find that some of the possessions are in like a tandem kid carrier kind of a bike attachment, and so, to that, if that becomes part of the equipment or the possessions that the facility then brings inside and puts in a lock away during the period of time that a person is there in the warming shelter, and the bike sits out on the rack, you know, trying to differentiate how some of these things might come away. Do they have room in that facility to bring bikes inside?
I'm not so sure about that. I do know that, as Jenna Shogren mentioned last week, they do have an intention of when people come in, they will check in their personal effects. So I don't know if that means, you know, their bikes will also be pulled inside if they have bikes, or the intention is put a bike rack and bikes stay outside and we'll lock them up for you. I honestly not sure what their intention is when they say they're going to be checking in. And whether, I also don't know, does check-in mean you give us your personal items, they go in a locked locker, or we're just going to search through them to make sure you have no weapons? I don't know what that means either. So that item, that number 5, Mr. Chair, I can see where that could use some, potentially some rewording, and be open to any recommendations that the commission might have of ways to reword that, to allow for things like a bike to be set on a bike rack, but make sure we still kind of exclude the shopping cart full of stuff.
And I do think that we should at least allow for, like we have outside of the courthouse here, or the city hall here, you know, a bike rack, where, you know, if you've got a parking lot for one means of transportation, we should be able to allow another means of transportation. So if we could include or exclude from that the bicycles that are I'm trying to think of the words here, that are parked on a rack, you know what I mean, what we're trying to get at here, designated, so they're not just thrown on the grass, but
Would that be as simple as saying, you know, adding to the end of number 5 with the exclusion of a bike rack for bicycles?
Yeah. There you go. Other questions for staff or comments on proposed language?
I would just Mr. Chair, just make the remark that I think it is going to be just human nature that somebody will bring a cart, and if it's 25 below, for God's sakes, I hope we don't throw them out or say you're breaking the rules. Just be kind and say, you've got a cart here tonight, and just be gone with it in the morning. So that's all I would, but that has nothing to do with the ordinance. I think the ordinance is pretty much good to go.
And I think there, if I can, Mr. Chair, to Commissioner Gorham's comment there, you know, are we going to be sitting there going, they had a cart, bring their interim use permit in for reconsideration? No. I think it's more of like, if it ends up being, you know, a regular thing where there's 10 carts out there and they're hogging and they're looking like eyesores, then we might need to have a discussion and saying, you've got a problem, we need you to figure out a solution for it. But otherwise, no, we're not going to be so anal as to be, you know, checking every night and there's a cart there. One thing I would like to bring up, Mr. Chair, only because I told Chief Bestel that I would. One comment he made to me yesterday and today is a comment regarding, I'm trying to way to phrase his comment right here. Kind of essentially regarding an out clause, regarding potentially, you know, if things do not go well, giving the city the opportunity to reevaluate. We do have language within the code about if they are violating the conditions of the permit, then it can be brought before the commission for reconsideration, and the commission can make a recommendation to the city council to revoke. I don't think that's necessarily what he was looking for. It's more of, you know, if they end up being, you know, if it ends up being a situation where the police department is getting 20, 30, 40 calls a week to the location, and it's clearly management is not going well, that can be considered. What I told Chief Bestel, I think maybe the best direction to go with that would be maybe as a condition on the interim use permit, not necessarily in the ordinance, but something to keep in mind. And then my thought was, in preparation for the 17th, if that's a condition the commission would like to consider would be using drawing language, essentially conduct on premise language from our section 425, our rental housing ordinance. That talks about, if there's continuing calls, the police chief can recommend revocation. And that's where something I think we could go down that route. I don't think it needs to be in the ordinance. I think that's something you could add to a condition on the permit itself.
And it would be my preference that we would handle it at the permit level and not the ordinance level. I don't know if there's a different perspective here on those kinds of conditions. But it seems reasonable that you can do it at the permit level, and allow staff to be able to administer that.
And that's something too, I think part of that coming from Chief Bestel, as he was saying, part of it is this is just the first time we're doing this. Down the road, if they have to come back to reapply, maybe that condition comes off, or when we see that it is being managed properly and there's a lot of success and there's not having to be any involvement of the PD. His just concern is initially as we're getting going, it's kind of a big unknown, and that's where that recommendation came from.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Erickson?
Well, I think that's a good suggestion. I like how you laid that out at the condition level, or the permit level. What I was thinking too is, this is an interim use. Come time when we update the zoning code and approve that, that would also be another opportunity to revisit this.
There
that
are
correct?
multiple opportunities. We discussed that as well. It could, when you get to the point of reviewing their interim use permit, because it's an interim use permit, the planning commission and the council has all authority to put a timeline on it, and that timeline can go as, in theory, as long as you want it to. So you could say, this interim use permit is good until a new zoning code is adopted. You could give it a specific date, say June 1st, 2022, so you let them get through the first winter, and then you come back and they have to come back and ask for it. Gives the planning commission an opportunity to reevaluate. There are opportunities, because it's an interim use permit, to kind of put those conditions on there that makes them come back and gives the planning commission the ability to reassess, is this working?
Now, is it 63-6B that of the ordinance here that basically states that the permit would be invalidated at such time as the ordinance is revised, and there's language to that effect in there. I think it's 6B. And so, I think our overall approach here, the spirit of what we're trying to do is to be able to get this use established for this season while we're working on revising the ordinance, and it would be our intent that the revised ordinance would handle this more globally and more completely. We're doing this pretty quick, so the benefit of giving the consultants time to help us think through that, including issues like Chief Bestel basically raised, that'll help us. So I think we're in good hands now, and then we can deal with any of the questions here at the permitting level, so. Any other questions? With that, I'd be looking for a motion to affirm the language as presented here and revised during the conversation, and recommending adoption by the city council at their November 1st meeting.
I will make said motion to accept the language and recommend adoption by the council.
Motion by Gorham, is there a second?
Second.
And Woodward, second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Do we have additional business on our agenda? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Erickson and Durham, second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No opposed. Gavelled it too quick. Thank you very much.
I would say it's probably the quickest planning commission meeting, but then again, it was a special meeting, so I'm not 100% sure if it counts.
Either way.
I don't think we've had any quick ones since I joined.
I thank you all for being here tonight. I want to say that.